The tone of Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I know you've kind of discussed this before, that you were kind of making it Marvel's first romantic comedy. You did say that, didn't you?
Well,
Am I misquoting you?
Well, someone said originally, and I forget where it started online, that like, oh, it's going to be a romantic comedy. And I never said it was going to be a romantic comedy, but I did say it was definitely going to have elements of a romantic comedy.
Sure. I mean, I guess my question is how do you kind of, how do you bring that sensibility into a comic book movie? Do you work on it that hard, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I liked that it seemed like the natural progression for a sequel to Ant-Man to be about Ant-Man and the Wasp. They were a partnership in the comics, and we had set it up in the first movie. So part of the thing I did was really looking at, we knew we wanted to stay in the crime genre, but you couldn't avoid the romantic comedy aspect, and I didn't want to. I liked that. It felt different in the context of the MCU. We have a male-female partnership, and that should be a part of it. So I went back and looked at what I kind of call the holy trinity of romantic comedies, which for me, His Girl Friday, Philadelphia Story, It Happened One Night.
Interesting.
And what I like about all those movies, and I've been fans of those movies for years, is that it was an era in Hollywood studio filmmaking where they wrote really strong, complicated female characters in the movies. And they're generally a little smarter than the men in those movies.
Yeah.
And there is a mutual respect between the male and female characters in those movies that really comes across. I also think particular to Philadelphia Story, that movie really is about Katharine Hepburn has to kind of find forgiveness in Cary Grant for them to be together at the end. And it was a big part of this thing because we couldn't ignore the events of Captain America Civil War. Scott Lang took the suit and went off and got fighting. And, you know, I knew Hank Pym would be pissed off about that and Hope would be feel betrayed. And part of this movie was Hope finding forgiveness for Scott.
Can I ask, because I mean, Evangeline Lilly, I was discussing with her, she writes screenplays. Paul Rudd is a credited screenwriter on this. So you've got two screenwriters as your leads.
Yeah.
How frustrating is that for you as a director?
In the wrong hands,
or is it frustrating?
Yeah, no, I think in the wrong hands to have an actor who's also the screenwriter, it could go south really quickly. In this case, Paul Rudd, who is a credited screenwriter on both movies, he is as generous as a writer as he is as an actor. He has the big picture in mind. And with Evangeline, who's also a writer, it's really good for me because it means both these actors are doing their homework, not only about their individual characters, but about how the whole movie should lay out.
Sure.
I worked with Evangeline really early on about the character of Hope, and specifically Ant-Man and the Wasp's version of Hope, you know, because she's resolved the issues she had with her dad in the first movie. So she's a different character in this movie. So we talked a lot about minute details, not only the emotional part of the character, but she's like, listen, I want to be a female hero who goes through a fight scene and I'm sweaty and my hair is really simple. I'm not all glammed up. I want it to feel real and practical.
Mm. The post-credit scene was brilliant, and I'm obviously not going to talk about it in too much detail, but at what point in the process were you thinking about that? I mean, is that literally from when you're handed the script and it's right, okay, this is in the script, or was it a case of...
No, it's interesting because the idea of how we were going to deal with Infinity War was an idea we sort of kicked down the street a bunch as we were coming up with the story and coming up with the screenplay. It's like, well, let's make our story work. Let's get this thing down and singing, and then we're going to deal with it. And at one point we talked about, throughout the course of our story, we knew people were going to come into this movie looking for clues.
Yeah.
And we don't give them clues for a long time. So at one point we talked about, oh, do they pass by? There's a monitor playing a news story. This is going on in the other part of the world. We'd seen that in movies and it felt lazy. So when we landed on the structure for the final movie that you saw, it felt right to us. It felt like, let's tell our story and let's find the resolution in that story and have a really fun title sequence. And then like, oh, what's this scene? What are they up to now? And throw all these different elements of the audience. You know, oh, there's Janet in street clothes and they're on a parking deck. And wait, what's Luis's van doing here? And he's in the Ant-Man suit. All these things to hopefully keep the audience off balance and then address the issues of Infinity War.
What happens with it,
Yeah.
Final question. Do you foresee a third one? And if you do foresee a third one, I mean, obviously it's contingent on box office and what have you. How will you progress the story on in the broadest possible sense, if you can do that?
Well, listen, I would love to do a third one. Right. I'm not being coy when I say there's currently no plan to do a third one. Who knows?
Yeah.
I really don't know. I do know that there's a lot more story to tell with these characters, and I know that we've thought a lot about very specific things that happen to these characters. hopefully we're going to be allowed to do that and tell these stories. I think particularly there's a lot more story to be told with the quantum realm and with Janet Van Dyne. I mean, we've just gotten her out. Like, what has happened to her in those 30 years? I also think we get toward the end of this movie and we finally see a working version of the Ant-Man and Wasp partnership. And it feels like Scott finally is like, okay, there is a place in my life to be Ant-Man. So what does that look like moving forward? I also want to see what happens to Scott and Luis's business. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of stuff there.
That's a whole other thing that you could do.
Yeah. So I think we definitely think a lot about things that could happen and set up certain things in this movie. But as for the future, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks a lot, man.
Excellent, yeah.
Appreciate that.
We're going to die. I don't want to die. We didn't die!
Hey, what'd I miss?
We were just tiny!
It takes two to make a thing go right.